Welcome back, everybody. You're watching Abstract Live. My name is Mr. Skeleton, and I've been appointed as the new CEO here at Abstract. I don't have any personal relationship with the previous guy, so I don't know who that was, but I'm here to stay. I'm going to be here forever until we made it. So we've got a very special edition for you planned today. It's going to be a very spooky edition for our Halloween special here. We're going to do a material where I'll take you through some very interesting workflows that are themed for Halloween, so I hope you're going to like this one. But before we get started, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any of the new videos. And also, speaking of videos, I don't know if you saw it, but we dropped a really interesting video on our Abstract YouTube channel where we take you through a workflow that shows how to UV unwrap a mesh in Instalot and then take it into Instamat for more complex texturing. I think it's a great video because we show you guys how to do a more complex UV unwrap that's not just a single tile but multiple tiles that are then textured very easily and consistently in Instamat. But actually, guys, I'm being called to a meeting. I'm going to be back in a few seconds. All right, guys, I'm back. Thank God I don't have to wear this mask again. It's like being stuck in a refrigerator or something and it's on fire. It's really terrible. I don't know. Jeremy, did you see this?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I wasn't ready for this. That was great.
Yeah, it's like that being in a cave and talking into a microphone, and everything is like really difficult. You only hear yourself like 10 times. So I'm glad that I don't have to wear this mask anymore, and we can talk about more of the things we want to do today. Like Mr. Skeleton said in the intro, we have some very interesting workflows planned for today. It's mostly Instamat. We're going to do a material where we show you how we can scatter some meshes on three-dimensional meshes and then use them for creating a material. I think that's a pretty awesome workflow. It's something that you can only do in Instamat. There's no other ways to do this in other tools. Right, Jeremy? Normally this would cover multiple different applications. You would have to model your mesh and then spread it out in a tool, bake it down there, and then import your textures into the application where you want to build your material.
Absolutely. It's a workflow that spans across multiple software, and because we can use Instamat's element graph to combine images and meshes and all types of processing in one go, it makes things very, complete and succinct. So I'm really looking forward to see the material that we create today.
Do you have a spooky background?
I do.
I see very tiny in the distance.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a spooky background, some jack-o'-lanterns, full moon in the back, just to be a little festive as well.
That's awesome. We should have done the same, actually. But I feel like with the mask, that was a lot already, to be honest. Bringing the mask was bringing all the heat. Yeah.
So, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, so thanks for being here today, Jeremy. So let's see what else we have on the list. There's a few items that I have to cover at the end. We mentioned the video. I don't see it on the channel. Why don't I see it on the channel?
I think it should be under videos. Yeah, we try to highlight some getting started videos on the main page. There it is. Yeah, I'm really excited about that video. It's a really fun one to create, and it just kind of shows how our different software with Instalot and Instamat interact really well together. How you can kind of link up these different workflows. So it was nice to get that video out. Yeah,
absolutely. And as you guys see, we also moved a lot of our videos from the previous channels onto our main Abstract 3D channel. So if you haven't seen them, I think they might be new for a lot of you guys. I recommend checking them out. There's some really interesting videos from the customers that use Instalot, like the Sonic case study here, but also some other videos you might find interesting when it comes to workflows to spark your imagination as to what you can do. If you combine the power of Instalot with the might of Instamat, I think it allows for some really awesome workflows. All right, it shouldn't be a too long live stream for you guys today. The last one was extremely long. I'm still recovering from the last live stream, to be honest. But we do want to show you guys the workflow as compact, as concise as possible, so you can try it yourself and pick it up and see what you can do with it. So let's get started with Instamat. So my team provided me a couple of FBX files here. You can see the bone, foot, hand, ribs, skull. We can take a look at these if I open up Instalot and then load them in. It seems Instamat is already running on our live stream machine. from last time. Actually, yeah, that's what we did 1 week ago, which is actually, it's a nice asset. Kudos, whoever built that. I'm going to close it so we can start fresh. So let's bring in some of those assets so we can see what we're going to be dealing with in our live stream today. So here you have a skull that has 12,000 polygons. It doesn't seem to have UVs. What else do we have? What's a scap?
Oh, I think that's for scapula.
Ah, it's like a hip.
For your shoulders.
It's a shoulder blade.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So the common folk call it shoulder blade.
Right. It's much easier.
The peasants. So what else do we have? The ribs here. How do the ribs look? Those are ribs. Getting hungry from seeing those ribs. All right, and here's a foot. So we have a couple of different body parts that we could potentially use in the material. I don't have any idea what I'm going to do. I just thought about a rough concept together with the team that we could be doing, but I didn't really prepare anything. So we're going to be starting out from scratch and just see where it takes us. Yeah, let's go.
Great.
So this is going to be a project that we'll be starting with the element graph. As you guys know, the element graph is a really powerful procedural system where you can build beautiful materials, but you can also combine it with point cloud processing, mesh processing. You can work with scalars, do mathematics, and even JSON files. So there's a lot of interesting things we can do. And today we're going to be touching on a few of those different elements. Of course, there's many ways how we could approach this topic, but we're going to show you one workflow. If you guys like it, we might expand to do a similar material with a different workflow. So again, to start my material, I'm going to bring in a material make node, right click it, and then I'll choose preview as material so I can immediately see it here on my cube on the left side. And I'll just set a darker base color and desaturate it. And that's my starting point right here. All right, Jeremy, how should we start here? So we do know that we want to scatter or place, distribute our 3 meshes on a plane. I guess that's what we do know, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the easiest thing to do is just go ahead and bring in the meshes into the package, and then we can just start adding in some material.
Absolutely. So I'm going to be dragging in the skull into my package. Let's just get started with the skull. We can be using other meshes later, but I think just one mesh to get started with, I think that's a good starting point, and then we can see if we have enough time to build onto that single mesh. So I'll also rename this as my skull and bones. That's how I'm going to call this material. And I know I want to create a material, so it's a good thing to name the categories of your material when you begin, because otherwise you might forget it. And it also helps to set a description. I'm not going to do that right now. And I'll save my material on the desktop here. All right, so we know we want to do something with the skull, so I can bring it into my graph and then spawn it directly as a mesh, and then here's our skull. And what I like to do when I'm working with meshes is I'm going to bring up a mesh render depth, because that allows me to look at the mesh in the graph, and I don't need to preview anything in the viewport. It's good enough. But if I want to see it with colors, I could use the regular mesh render node actually and look at it this way. All right, so we want to scatter, and there's a node for it. It's called mesh scatter on topology. And there's other ways to do it. A bit more involved would be to use physics scatter, but I'm not going to do it this time, because otherwise we spend more time on setting up the physics scatter. And I think understanding how to build a tileable texture or material based on 3D meshes that's work enough. So let's keep it here. So mesh scatter on topology basically takes an input mesh. In this case, we have this cube here, and then we are scattering some other mesh on it. So in this case, we scatter a cube on cubes, and we can click on the output, and here you see what happens. So we scatter the cube on the bigger cube. We don't see the big cube because we didn't enable append input. So if I enable append input, you'll see what we're doing here, and then you can control how many of those objects you want to scatter on your input mesh. All right, so but in our case, what we want to do is we want to basically scatter some objects on a plane, because the plane is what's going to be the basis for our material. And to do this, we need a plane, and luckily we have a node to quickly create such an such a mesh using the mesh shape generator. And that's the beautiful thing about Instamat, is that we're always trying to be consistent. So you might know the regular shape generator that you use when you build your materials. There's also the mesh shape generator, and the idea is pretty much the same. If you understand the 2D shape generator, you probably understand what we're going to do with the 3D shape generator. And I can preview this as well using mesh render depth. And you see by default we're generating a sphere here, and what we want is actually a plane. So I'll select the plane, and we don't see it because it's flat, but if I tilt my camera downwards a little bit, we can see the plane. And I think it helps to make sure you have the right size. So I'll start with a size of 100 by 100 for our plane, like this. And if we preview
just one question there about the sizing. So how does Instamat kind of measure size units in 3D space? Because now that we're starting to talk about scattering and sizes of meshes, what's kind of the rule of thumb here?
I mean, coordinate spaces are always what you want them to be. So you can consider one unit being 1 meter. You can consider 100 units to be one meter, where 1 unit would be a centimeter. It really depends how you want to think about it. As long as you're consistent, it doesn't matter too much, right? If you make sure you use 1 unit as 1 centimeter, then you should make sure to use the same coordinate system in the modeling application, use the same coordinate system in Instamat, and use the same coordinate system in your renderer as well. Then everything's going to be fine. I think you're going to be in trouble when you start mixing things up, because then you always have to scale, rescale, figure out what the right size is. But if you know you're going to use something like 100 for roughly 1 meter, then you're settled. But you could do this with just 1 by 1 as well. It would just work perfectly.
Great.
Right, so you see we have the subdivisions on the plane here. I enabled the wireframe, and you can see that there's quite a lot of subdivisions, and you can control that. If you want to increase it, you can just set it to 16 and have 16 by 16 for your plane. But in our case, it doesn't really matter too much what we use here. So let's go back to the cube. All right, and fundamentally we have our skull right here, which we looked at already. It's actually upright. That's something that I realized. I think when I scatter it, it should probably be laying on its back, so it looks more like sunken in when we displace it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can also randomize some of the rotation at some point, right? Just to give it a little bit of variance.
Yeah, but I think it helps when you have like a basis orientation for your object that matches what you want to do. So mesh transform actually works quite similar to the 2D transform that you're used to when you work with images. And you can move it around, you can rotate it using W, E, and R like you can do in applications like Maya. So it's very, very convenient. If you know Maya, you'll feel at home with our 3D gizmos as well. But it helps when you do a scatter to make sure that the base orientation roughly matches how you want to scatter it, because then you only apply a little bit of variance, and it's not so difficult to get set up. So I think it might make sense to scatter it like this, or maybe even like this actually, right? I think scattering it in this state is much better.
Yeah, because that's more physically accurate. It's, if it was resting back.
Exactly.
That would make sense.
Yeah, so I like this orientation here. And then we know we want to scatter this object on our plane, so I'll plug in the plane as the input mesh, and I'll choose our skull as the scatter mesh. And then we're going to preview the output in our viewport. And I actually don't see anything here.
It's possible that the skulls are just so small.
Exactly.
And since we used a larger, we were talking about those coordinate spaces. So in this case, we might need to either decrease the size of the plane or increase the size of the skulls.
Yeah, I'll increase the size of the skull. So to do this, you can just conveniently change the minimum and maximum scale values. So let's say we want to have a maximum scale of 10 units and a minimum scale of, say, maybe around 8 units. And you see, that's why I like to use the 100 unit plane and think about 1 unit being 1 centimeter, because then you don't have to have these small values to adjust everything. Otherwise, it would be 0.8 and 1 most likely. No, actually, it would be 0.08 and 0.1. Right, super small values. I don't like that so much.
Right. Fractionals. Mm-hmm.
All right, so here is our result, and if you want to see that in the canvas, we can also now take that mesh and then just plug it here, and we see it in our mesh render depth node. And if we do any changes, everything would update. So that actually doesn't look too bad. The default settings appear to be quite nice already for our purposes, right? It's sitting perfectly as I rotated it. So that's the benefit of making sure the initial rotation orientation looks good. And then we can tweak how it how it's oriented. Right now we do orientation around the up axis, which is why it always remains flat, which is pretty nice. And you can control this here with a maximum rotate. If I set it to 0, you see they all face into the same direction, which already looks very creepy actually. All those skulls just staring at us here. Yeah, and we do want to have some rotation right around the z-axis. I think that's for sure. That makes a lot of sense. And we could also have some rotation around maybe the x-axis or the y-axis, maybe a little bit, so they look sunken in. I think that looks pretty good as a basis for a material. And then all we have to do is spawn more of those. By the way, if you don't want the skull to be scattered with its pivot being the bottom of the mesh on the plane, you can also change the custom scatter mesh pivot. This allows you to control the center of your mesh. So if you want the center to be anchored on the plane, you can just set that to 0.5 on Y, and you see now the Y-axis of the mesh is centered on the plane. So this allows you to easily set up where you want the mesh to be. So if you want to have some skulls that are perfectly above the plane, this is how you would do it. If you want them by default to be a bit sunken into the plane, you could set that to 0.1. And those are normalized values, by the way. So 0.5 means halfway, and then 1 means all the way to the top. And you can see now it's actually below the plane, because now we align the up axis top, the bounding box top, to the pivot point, which means everything is below the plane.
Yeah, so this, because they're normalized, it also means we can change the mesh at any time, and those coordinates and those pivots will always remain consistent.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I think the normalized space that Instamat uses for these kind of things makes it very easy to do procedural geometry, because everything is always has an anchor point that's relative to the bounding box and not in some absolute value. But we typically have absolute values that you can use as well for a lot of the mesh features, if that's what you want to do. Yeah, so let's add a few more skulls here, I think. So let's go and scatter 50 skulls, and that's how it looks. There's a lot of overlap here, right? That's a big issue, that we have all of those skulls now stuck in each other. That doesn't look too realistic here. In this area, for instance, that doesn't look great. And if we scatter more, we'll have more of those issues, right? Because the scatter just finds a random point on the plane and then adds a skull. Finds a random point on the plane, adds a skull. That's one of the benefits that you could actually have if you would use a physics-based scatter, that you would naturally build more layers of skulls. You would naturally avoid those intersecting areas here. But I'll show you how you can avoid this if you just use the regular mesh scatter on topology. And by the way, this is also fully random. So if you change the seed of your graph or you change the seed of the node, you'll see you get completely different arrangements. And by the way, this is doing 1.2 million polygons. It's 1.27 here, and it did it in 20 milliseconds. So this is pretty much real-time scattering, quite a lot of polygons. But if you want to avoid the intersections here, there's a very easy and handy feature you can use. And we have the same feature for our 2D scatters, guided scatter, tile scatter as well. And we typically call it cancellation. Here's the feature. And if I enable it, the scatter will make sure that you don't have a scatter point close to another scatter point. So I can enable cancellation. And you see there's already some skulls gone. And if I increase the cancellation radius, you'll see we can fix all of these intersections, just like this. But then you would typically have to crank up the scatter count, because you remove some of the scatters will be cancelled because they're too close to another scatter point, so you have to crank up the count a little bit, and then we can increase the scatter counts, the scatter cancellation radius a bit further to make sure we remove more of the intersections. I think some intersections are not too bad, to be honest, but let's find a good value here. Maybe like this.
That's looking pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree.
And so one thing I want to mention is, we easily made it to about 1 million polygons with, scattering the skull, but you can also easily optimize the scattered mesh, as by doing kind of a pre-processing step, just to be able to, if your computer's starting to slow down a little bit by scattering so much geometry, we've got the technology from Inslot built right in here, the polygon optimizer, and so you can easily just build that into the node workflow so that you could reduce the polygon count by 50% or down to 20% of the original count, and that could just be built right in. You don't have to worry about the polygon count. Absolutely.
So by using Inslot here and decimating the skull from 12K to just 1,000 polygons brings the whole scatter down to just 57K, which is pretty good. But I don't think I need it. I feel like Instamat is fast enough to handle the 500,000 polygons that we have here after being cleaned up. I think that's pretty good. So what do we do next then? So that's our scatter. And let's say we want to create a height map from it. So one thing you could do is you could actually use the mesh render depth for it. And the way that you could do it is by switching your camera from perspective to orthographic, because we don't want to have perspective distortion here or parallax. So I'll switch that to orthographic. And then I'll just reset my camera orientation and set the x-axis rotation to -90. And you can see that it's very nicely framed, and all we have to do is scale up our base plane here to make sure it perfectly covers the viewport like this, right? And to level our height map, I'll just use auto levels, and you see it looks pretty good this way. So here we have a 2D texture now that represents our baked down mesh, and we can use it for texturing. But hold up, sir, you might think. Hold up, sir. Is this tiling? I don't know, let's see. And as you can see, it's very spooky. It's not tiling. It's absolutely shocking to see how bad this looks. So if we would use this on our cube, it would not be tiling, and you would see all of those seams. It's pretty bad. So let's look at some ways of how we could fix this. There's two image-based methods that you could use to fix it. For instance, you could bring in the make seamless node here, and I'll double click it, and you see it made it seamless automatically. But you also have these blending areas where we blend those two different parts of the textures are being blended together that then act as the patch for the seam, right? So here's our seam. Let me enable the seam guide. I'll enable this, and you see it adds some objects, blends some things together to mask this. But it also results in some half skulls, some overlaps, you know, where things like this in this area here, where you see there's a skull somewhat blending on another skull, and that really destroys our height map. I mean, this isn't actually something that artists often do, because fixing this on the mesh level is very difficult. Because what you would have to do is basically you would need to take a skull that somewhere, let's disable this, take this skull that's scattered on that edge, and then you have to copy it and mirror it perfectly on this edge. So you see the remaining part of the skull on this edge. So it's very tricky, but that's how it's typically done, but it's very involved. So Make Seamless can do it, and you can control, you know, the softness of your patch, that the small band that we're inserting here. You can control the curve to make it a bit less apparent depending on the material type. And you can even introduce some warping on the band-aid we're putting over the seam here to make it even less obvious. So like this, it's almost workable. What do you think, Jeremy? It almost works, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for this type of workflow, it's often used for, I guess the word is stochastic kind of textures, where you can't really see the definable pattern or noise that's used for this. But you're absolutely right. This is a very common technique used in like image editing programs to be able to blend seams together and make tileable patterns. So it's nice to be able to automate this using one node.
Absolutely. I mean, this is actually the workflow, right? If you think back to the Quake 3 era of times, you know, before we had a lot of very, very well working texturing applications. Textures were created from photos. You loaded them into a tool like Photoshop or Affinity Photo, and then you manually did this approach here where you cut out a part and move it here, and then you blend it in. You use the patch tool or a stamp tool to stamp those areas. So this was actually how it used to be done, and within some at that part you can actually automate. And there's another way of doing it, but as Jeremy mentioned, this actually works best if there's a very chaotic input image. But even if it's very structured like a brick wall, you can make it work by using Translate, because with Translate you can basically align the band-aid perfectly to your row of bricks and the columns. So if I move it from top to bottom, you can see it moves on that band, and if I move from left and right, it moves the other band. So this allows you to make sure that it actually works even if the inputs are more structured. And another way of doing this would be to use the Make Seamless synthesis, and that's actually an interesting node right here. And let's enable the full res mode, because it's in preview mode. So what this does is it actually cuts your input image into many small pieces, and then it's trying to puzzle the pieces into the seam so you don't see it as much. As you see, it actually does work. You don't see the tiling, but you see some weird fragments here, and you have a lot of control over the quality, so you can change the quality to ultra, and it's going to do a better job at finding gaps. It's going to cut much smaller pieces and bigger pieces, so you see it forms more somewhat correct pieces and fragments. You can also control the mask size, so it's very big. So if I set it to something like 0.1, it's going to do a smaller band. You see, let's disable this. So you see, here is the seam. It's quite visible. But the synthesis node patches those gaps so you don't have a hard seam here. So that actually works pretty well. By being able to control the size of the gap, you can actually mask this pretty nicely, but it depends on your content. But as you guys saw, make sure you don't work in preview mode. We use the preview mode for heavy nodes by default. So when you spawn it, you're not blocked because it runs slow and because you have your execution resolution set to 4K or 8K or something like this. So by default, preview just drops the resolution of the process.
Yeah, I definitely say the first method there, the non-synthesis version, is definitely the quickest way, in terms of processing. If you're trying to build an optimized graph where you're able to get, results very quickly, I'd recommend using that one along with some kind of clone patching nodes and things that we have as well, to be able to kind of fix those issues. But then if you are creating, sort of texture maps or baked out images for your textures,
I think our producer didn't crop you in. Mr. Producer, you have to bring Jeremy in when he's speaking. I think you haven't been on screen. It's spooky. It doesn't work. Yeah, guys, actually we have a different producer today. Our resident producer is not on site. He's on vacation, on a Halloween vacation. So we're trying to fill the gaps here. And as you guys see, some things are going wrong, but I'm sure we're going to make it work as part of this stream. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, Jeremy.
Oh, you're absolutely fine. No, I was just saying, there's two different methods here that we're looking at, and probably some more as well. And you can use all these methods to achieve a similar result. But let's say, for example, an artist is trying to build a procedural material that they want to very quickly generate maps and that are always seamless. Some nodes work faster than others. Some workflows work more in quote unquote real time better than others do. And so for the original, the first method that we talked about, where it's doing that kind of offset, kind of old school kind of tiling workflow where we're blending the images together and offsetting them, that works a lot more quickly than say something using like image synthesis. But image synthesis, in my opinion, is a great way to get a very good result almost all the time, but it doesn't happen as instantly as using the other method. So if you're generating baked out texture maps, don't get me wrong, it's still pretty quick. This could be a great way to generate those maps using synthesis as another way. Yeah,
but I'm not sure if synthesis is always the best tool, to be honest. I feel like it's a different tool. Like, you don't want to use a chainsaw to cut a banana, right? I mean, like, you can do that, but it might not give you the right result. So I think you have to know both nodes, and then you'll develop a feeling for what's the right node for which kind of content you're processing. It's very difficult to get something that works in all situations because every image is so different. One image can be very structured like a brick wall, and the other one could be very chaotic like a soil or patch of grass. So you have to know what you're doing. But in any case, guys, I just wanted to show you these two approaches. So they're just part of your tool set, but there's a much better way that's unique to Instamat that I want to show you guys. So I'll just select those guys right here, and then I'll move them to the right. And there's a one-shot 360 no-scope approach of doing this kind of problem, and it's called mesh tile. So mesh tile solves this problem for you. It's making sure that whatever mesh you put into it is going to be fully tileable in the end, no matter what it is. There's, by default, as you see, that nothing is happening here. So there's one thing you have to understand, and that is you need to know how big your tile is. And that brings me back to the beginning where I chose 100 units. So all I have to do is plug the 100 units into here, and you can see that we have our result. And if I double click this, you see I also don't have to normalize anything. It just works.
So if that loads it up into the viewport, right? And then you can double click it again to get into the image viewer.
Exactly. So I loaded it as a mesh. That's actually pretty cool. We see it as a mesh up here. But I want to go back to my cube. We should have a shortcut to go back to the cube. Maybe somebody can request that feature. I would vote it up in our community. I think it would be a good feature to just go back to the cube. In any case, here you guys can see what mesh tile did. It fixed this problem perfectly. There's no seams, there's no overlap. It's continuous. You see the skull goes over the blue line, which is our image boundary. So you can see that if I disable tiling here. You see if I go back here, you see here's the blue line. There's some halfway skull. And if I switch back to the tiling, you can see that the halfway skull is perfect. And there's no gap. It's seamless. There's not a single pixel that's incorrect. This is absolutely wonderful.
This is such a game changer for so many workflows where people have to do this manually using something like ZBrush or Blender, and they have to do exactly what you talked about: move the other side of the mesh so that it clips and connects completely on the the other side of the tile. And so just being able to do this with one node and using the same kind of semantics, same kind of workflow that you would have when working with images. That's just such a nice thing about Instamat, is if you know how to work with images, then you know how to work with meshes in Instamat, and it makes sense. Mesh tile is going to tile, using a regular tile node is going to do like an image tiling. So it's a really nice way to be able to expand the capabilities of an artist who are already familiar with one workflow to doing the other.
I agree. And if you look at some of the most lauded materials, they often use this technique. And you can see the breakdown on ArtStation, where the artist creates the meshes, loads them into Maya, scatters them, does a lot of manual corrections, bakes it down into a plane, and then takes the outputs into a different texturing applications, only to do the workflow. So you see, it is very difficult. And here we do it with 2 nodes. We can do the whole workflow. We use the mesh scatter, and then we use mesh tile, and the thing is done. And what's really nice about the mesh tile node is you can also get the normal outputs for free, basically, if you want to get a normal map from your scatter. But you can also get outputs like UV and vertex color. I don't need the normal output in this case. I'll just use the regular workflow later. The vertex color we can use, but the UVs, if the skulls would have UVs, you could actually texture them later with a texture map if you want to have more detail on it, or you could bring in your baked mesh maps into your material, actually, if that's something you want to do. But as you guys can see here, our skull doesn't have UVs, so there's no use in bringing the UVs in, so I'll disable it. But I enabled the vertex color output here because there's some cool things we can do. For instance, we could create groups of different skulls and then identify them based on the vertex color, and then texture some specific groups in a specific way. And to do that, it's actually very easy. We can just, as you guys can see, the skull doesn't have vertex colors. It is white. But we can use a node in Instamat to create vertex colors. And all we have to do is use the mesh set vertex colors node. And then we can choose the color to assign. By the way, as you guys can see, there's an image assigned here. And if you have UVs, Instamat would read the UVs at a specific vertex and then sample the image and write the color from the image in that particular location. But we just want to assign a fill color here. So let's get started with the red color, and then we plug that into our scatter. And if everything works, you guys can see we have the red color on our skull. And I'll repeat this process. So I'll drag and duplicate the node using Alt or Command drag. It's actually Option, Alt or Option, drag. And then I have my node here duplicated. Then here on that node, I can just set red to 0, green to 1, okay. And then I Option drag another one of these nodes, and here I'll set blue to 1 and green to 0. So we have 3 different skulls now, and they all have different colors, but we still only have the red skull here on our baked result. And to get more of those skulls, all we have to do is change the scatter mesh count to 3. And now we're scattering 3 different meshes. And I can plug in the colors. You can see it recomputes our output. And once more. And now we have those different skulls here that we could, if we want to, use during texturing. I'm not sure if we're going to do this yet, but it might come in handy to have the skulls with different colors.
Just another thing to note as well, just like optimizing the meshes from the skulls earlier on, you can unwrap the UVs of the skulls like as a pre-processing step when scattering as well. So you don't have to have perfect meshes for with UVs and minimized polygon counts right away and working with Instamat. You can still use it as a very much mesh processing tool that can also create these materials.
Absolutely. So,
also, we have a really nice comment from someone in the chat just saying that Instamat is everything I wished for while I was trying to get the hang of Substance, and then I found Instamat. I'd rather spend my time learning this. They say, what you guys are doing is groundbreaking, and absolutely thank you so much for that comment.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's exactly the kind of comment that we like to hear, because we work so hard behind the scenes. We've been working on Instamat for years, trying to figure out how to actually pull this off in a way that you still get ultra high performance for ultra complex materials, and you don't have to sacrifice workflow or performance when it comes to creating those projects. So let's just see what we get when we bring this into our material in the end, right? It's just 2D, keep that in mind. So when I take my vertex color and I just plug it into the base color, we can see the result here. I'll take the height and I'll create a normal map from my height map using height to normal, plug it in. And I want to take the height and bring it directly into the height. And let's just take a look at how that looks. It looks pretty good. I think the displacement is too low, right? For the skulls to really pop for this material, we need to have way more displacement here. So let's crank up the tessellation level and also increase the displacement factor, maybe to a value of 3. Yeah. Or maybe even 4.
Great.
Yeah. So now you guys can see, you actually scattered the skulls here. It looks pretty cool, 3-dimensional.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here is no longer a mesh, but we're actually looking at a PBR texture, something that's just using texture maps to be able to displace the geometry underneath it and redirect the lighting using normals. So this is just like you dragged a material out from Instamat's library and you see the material there. Now we're no longer looking at geometry, but we're utilizing geometry to build this type of image-based material.
Exactly, and you can see it here with the wireframe. It's really just a texture that's being applied, and if I would cycle through my different outputs using C, you can see that we have the height channel, the normal channel, and it's just flat textures basically. But it really pops and looks 3D if you then bring it into your graph and render it with displacement. It's pretty cool.
Great. There's one thing that I always keep in mind, though, when using meshes and scattering like this to capture the height map, is that if you have, hanging pieces or parts, a lot of times, it's hard for a texture that's using, standard displacement to be able to accurately create some kind of height map where there's sharp edges or underhangs, things like that. So what I often do is do something like slightly blur the height map so that we can remove those kinds of sharp, edges and things that you get from those corners.
That's a very insightful tip, guys. That's a good thing to do. And the way that I would like to do this normally is to switch to link category mode, take my material make node, and then simply do a material finalize. And then finalize could do that automatically for you. It has the height map blur built in, so it just makes sure that it renders a bit nicer even if you have a low tessellation level. But for now, while I work on this, I don't think I'll need it. So I go back to just having my material make, and then I'll go from here. So I'll remove the vertex color input here. Yeah, maybe quickly create a soil and bring the material together. I don't know how long we've been streaming already, but we wanted to go for not longer than 1 hour. All right, guys, so let's quickly create a soil. How can we do this? We should bring in a fractal sum. That's always a good basis for a soil. And
by the way, we got another nice comment in the chat here, just saying that someone else also agrees with the previous person that gave us a nice comment. They said that now in their professional job they use Instamat to create tileables, but other apps aren't able to create as high resolution textures like something like 16K. So it's really nice to be able to have something that's able to do all of this in a single package.
Absolutely, I think it's really awesome to be able to do this, and we could even go into the asset texturing part of Instamat and bring the skulls in and then use it as some really weird ornament or create like a skull jacket. That could look really awesome. All right, so I brought in these 3 different noise nodes. I want to set up my fractal sum. As you guys know, I used the fractal sum before when I created the pavement material. I think I used it for that one as well to create like the base soil. And I really love it with the custom gain and increasing the gamma, because that way you can bring out a lot of like very fine-grained noise. So increasing the gamma makes it darker, but we can bring back the luminance if we increase the frequency gain, which creates these really interesting noise patterns here.
Yeah, the fractal sum node is so versatile. It's really nice to be able to just tweak a few of those settings to get, really nice procedural patterns. And I recommend to people just put a fractal sum node into a material make node, generate the different maps like the normal map and the displacement, and just see what kinds of patterns and materials you can create just with the node. It's very flexible. Yeah,
absolutely. Just using a noise or a grunge as like a normal map and putting some things together. Sometimes it looks like a plaster or it looks like some soil. It's always interesting to experiment here. So I have these 3 different noises, and what I want to do here is use a node that you guys might not be familiar with, but I really like it when I'm creating my base noise for the soil, and it's called blend average. So blend average allows you to take multiple inputs into a single blend node, and then you can control the individual composition of the final image. And as you guys can see, this already looks very interesting, right? It has some structure, it has some cloudiness in some areas more, in other areas less. So this allows you to create a very interesting looking soil already, and then you can choose the different intensities you want to use. So if you want to have less of the stone noise, you can just dial it back. If you want to have less of that fine-grained fractal sum noise, you can dial it back or bring it back up.
This is another great example of the built-in nodes into Instamat, kind of thinking how we can make the workflow a lot easier for texture and material artists. A lot of times what you'd have to do otherwise is chaining a whole bunch of blend nodes together, right, and trying to dial these things in.
And then you can't dial it in as easily, right? Exactly. You can't just beautifully do a composition like playing an instrument. Quickly arrive at the point that you love. And if you want to do more blends, what's pretty cool is you can actually control how many inputs you want to have here. So I'll set that to 4, and I want to add one more structured input here, the flex. Let's see how we can add a bit of more like spot type noise to this without making it too strong. So this should just be very, very faint. Yeah, I think that doesn't look too bad. Let's see how that looks. So if we will plug that into our I created that reroute node up here, which is the master right now for this material. So anything I plug into it will then override all of our height, normal, and ambient occlusion settings. And here we can see the soil that we created. And you see the flex, we see a bit of like the base structure of the flex noise. We have some very fine areas in our soil that are very, very fine grained. And we do have some not so noisy areas. So I think this is a pretty good basis. What do you think for like a swampy type of soil?
Yeah. It looks a little spooky. I think the flecks are really weirding me out a little bit. So I think that's spot on. Yeah,
and you can now, looking at it this way, you can still control the individual contributions. If the flecks weird you out too much, you can just dial them down a little bit to tweak them just so they look perfect for you. I like them. Like some dried mud or something like this.
Yeah, it's cool.
And personally, what I don't like about soils is if they look like this, if the frequency of the noise is too high and it's not structurally too similar. I like that it has some hot spots when it comes to the frequency of the noise and some more sparse areas. I do like it, but there's another great tip for soils. It's something that I always used as a material artist. Is something like a, what do we call it? I think it's the non-uniform blur. So the non-uniform blur is really great for our purpose here. So I'll plug it in as the input, our blend average result. And then to control the intensities, we could use something like a Perlin noise or a Voronoi noise if you want the gradient to be a bit more intense. Let's try this. And then we control the scale like that. Plug it in here. And again, we just replace the input for our reroute node, and you guys can see it's way too strong. So what I'm doing here is I'll just increase the gamma to reduce the areas where we actually do the smoothing. But I think the gradient is too harsh. The fall off into the smooth areas is too strong. But let's dial it in. Maybe we can make it work. So the intensity is way too much. That's for sure. So we want to create those softer puddles here, so the material looks a bit more natural. Maybe decrease the gamma a bit so we don't have so much black areas. It should be something like a halfway dry but still wet soil. Maybe something like this.
It's pretty cool.
Let's see how it looks if we increase the roughness a bit. It's very low.
One thing I also use with the non-uniform blur is actually plugging in the same input that drives the blur as the input image, or even inverting it sometimes, and that gives you matching. So in this case, I don't think the contrast is high enough for the intensity input to see. But if we use like a levels or something to kind of crunch it down a little bit, then you have like a corresponding like high and low value that from the input mesh or input image that drives also the effect.
Yeah, that's a good idea. In this case, I do want to create those soft areas in the image just so it doesn't look the same, because otherwise I feel like it looks like a fractal, at least to me, a fractal sum, a high frequency noise as a base soil on a material just doesn't look right. It looks too just like a noise. And now it looks more like something that was, designed, something that looks a bit more natural. And what I like to do here as well, what I like about this node is that we can increase the sample count, which is important. But we can also use asymmetry and anisotropy. And the anisotropy will add those streaks. You see, if I remove it, it's more like a uniform blur. And like this, we add those streaks. So it looks a bit more like something that got rubbed over, right? Somebody walked over it and dragged some mud. So this is what I like about this node. And you can control the angle of this effect, the anisotropy. You can also control the amount of directions, but I'll just keep it on the default, and then maybe instead lower the gamma a little bit. It's not bad.
It's nice to have that eye rest, like I think what you're talking about with the high frequency everywhere kind of thing. Another principle or rule of thumb I always like is to make sure that you have areas that have concentrated detail, but your eye needs somewhere to rest. It needs to settle somewhere.
Exactly.
Understand what's going on.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're doing here.
Absolutely agree. That's why I like to add this blur to it, because it adds some kind of a plausible story to the material, but it also creates an area like this where your eye just initially is drawn to, and then it discovers and explores the rest of the material, right? That's what you mean.
Exactly.
But you see also how the flecks add a bit of that dry mud. I feel like that really makes it look more like soil, that we have the dry mud, and we don't need stones or other types of scatters here. This is already doing pretty much the Lord's work for us here.
Yeah, they're definitely growing on me.
Yeah, so what do we want to do? Maybe level it, right, to pronounce some areas a bit more.
Yeah, I think so. I always try to get, as strong a contrast, with the lights and darks of a map from the beginning, when I generate something. And then I can always, when I start compositing these different, essentially layers that we're making together, then you have more control. You have more of that information accessible to you.
Yeah, and now you see that I feel like our fractal noise is peaking too much. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it creates those spiky areas in the material, and we can dial this down by just controlling our input. So I think it's the number 3 that does this. Yeah, exactly. It's that custom gain fractal sum. But you see, if I dial that down, it looks really, really nice. That's why I love this workflow with the blend average, because you can easily control like the entire configuration of your base without having to go, like Jeremy mentioned. You don't have to have like this long chain of blend nodes. You have everything in one blend node, and you can nicely control exactly how you want the material to look like. And that's something about material design that some people love and some people hate, is like going from back and forth from the right edge of the graph to the left edge of the graph and having to dial in those values. But if you settle on your base very easily if you want to settle on your base very quickly, do it in this way. Compose your base noise, quickly connect it to the outputs, look at it with displacement, look at it with the normals, because just even if you have a good eye for it, I feel like it's still better to have a sequence like this where you can immediately review all of your different components that make up your map.
That's exactly the word I was going to use. I think of materials as a bunch of components, and if all the components by themselves look great, then when you start integrating them together, the material's going to still look great.
Right. Yeah, I think it's not bad. So, what are we going to do next then, Jeremy?
Well, do you want to integrate the two components together with the scattered pieces in the background?
Yeah, I think it's time to do this. How would you do it?
Well, I think I would blend the height maps together. And we have a few nodes that can do that pretty easily. And it also does a lot of extra things for us, like create masks for us. So I think that would be the quickest way to be able to start combining these pieces together.
Yeah, and guys, I mentioned this in a stream, I think, but always nicely group your stuff. Group your nodes. Just select them. Do everybody a favor. Hit Shift-C and type a comment. So this is our soil.
Absolutely.
You don't even need a lot of words, right? Just like this. And the benefit is, if you want to relocate those nodes, you can just drag the whole box. And you can even lock your comments, and then you can't drag them around anymore. At least that used to work. No, that was the render lock, right? We have a The comment lock is this guy.
We do have a comment
so
lock
locking
as well,
the comment,
yeah.
you see if I do that, the borders disappear, which means you can no longer drag it around and it's just a visual cue. But if you enable it, you can drag it around, you can resize it. Mr. Producer just told me we're 50 minutes in. Jeremy, we have to speed run this. Yeah.
Oh, I'm just having too much fun.
So let's finish our spooky material. How do we do it? As Jeremy said, we should take the output of our skull scatter, and then we use a blend height node, and we want to combine both height maps. So this should not be the bottom, this should be the top. The bottom should be what we have down here. Plug that in. And if I preview this in the image viewer, you see it already composes our skulls neatly together. And we can just plug the output into the reroute node, and then we'll see it on our cube. That looks pretty cool already.
Yeah, that was pretty easy, wasn't it? Just
beautiful
one node, and there you go.
But there's the node actually has more interesting outputs. So what you see right now is the combined image where we blend both the top and the bottom layer together, and you get the result. Basically, what the fragment that you see is the one that has a higher height value, but sometimes you want to later, say we want to color the skulls. How would we now select the skulls in the final image? And you can do this using the mask. So the mask basically tells you exactly where the top layer succeeded the bottom layer. Great. All right, so we have this assembled. I think what would be nice is if we could add some bulging to the height map around the skulls, right? How would you do this, Jeremy?
I was going to say the same. Well, we could use the non-uniform blur again as an option. We could use a guided blur as well. We could even do things like use the ambient occlusion map and kind of reverse that as well and build up to the surface.
Interesting.
There's a lot of cool ways to go about it. Yeah, I think, you know.
Yeah, I want to see the ambient occlusion. I've never used this. What I would have done is probably something like a bevel, because we have a black and white mask already. So I would just bevel outwards and then use a color profile, not a color profile, a ramp profile to make it not so linear the slope, but make it more like a exponential, like a parabola or something, so it's like more slope to the end. But I want to see how the AO actually looks like. But does that work? Wouldn't it be too noisy? I have never tried it.
We could absolutely do it. You could reduce the noise as well, because then but again it would have to be it would have to target just the kind of intersection of where the skulls are and around them. Otherwise it will do the entire map. So yeah, I'm curious to see what we could do by combining the mask and
let's explore it. And we can, to do this, if we do it with the default settings, the bias is so low that it would capture a lot of details on that we might not want to have. So to avoid these fragments, we can increase the bias and maybe set the quality to ultra and increase the height scale, maybe decrease the, actually no, we don't want to increase the height scale. We want to decrease the radius. And then we would have to invert this image, right? If you want to create a mask, something like this.
Exactly, and then we can add this onto the surface.
Have you ever done this workflow using the AO?
I think I have. I think I've used it for a few materials, and then we just have to, you know, adjust the intensity and maybe change the blending mode a little bit, and it's a nice way to quickly add some build up.
I agree. It does work. And the noisiness is actually not so bad. It makes it look a bit less polished. I do like it. It's not bad.
Almost like it's crusted over, like the surface is hardened and they've moved or jiggled due to some unnatural phenomena.
That's not bad.
You can also blur the mask that we're using to get the ambient occlusion, and then it'll give it more of a softer fall off.
Yeah, but then we have to subtract the skulls again, right? Otherwise we will blur into the skull, and then we'll add that when we blend our result. But we can also try to use a different fall off curve here, right? Instead of using linear, we could probably use square. And then increase
there you go.
Increase the strength. What else do we have? Sigmoid. Yeah, so a more intense fall off, I guess. I actually like this.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I guess I'll just use this. This was a nice tip. I like it. It's interesting. It's something else. But normally you would want to blur it, I guess, right? Because the noisiness. Let's blur it. Let's just do it. So we'll do a tiny blur here. Just a very small blur. And then to fix our skulls from being deformed, what we can do instead is then add another blend. And then we'll subtract our mask. That gives us the perfect mask of where our skulls are located. Here. And we'll plug that into the foreground. And then we set it to subtract. Like this. Yeah, it does look nice. So we can A/B this by disabling it. And you see like this, the skulls just lay on top. But if we enable it, it does look like there's some soil, it's sunken in. So it does make it look a bit more interesting. Actually, what is this peak here? Oh, I see what this is. The skull has a hole, and it's the soil that pokes through a hole, and now we add onto it, right? That's tricky.
Yes.
Yeah. And we could also multiply this with a different map also, right? So it's not so consistent. But I do like it. I just keep it like this. Pretty cool. Very nice material already. So what do we need next?
Well, do we want to keep using skulls, or do we want to add some more pieces, or maybe we can move on to something like the roughness and the
yeah, I think we should probably texture it. Let me tweak the soil a bit more.
This is great, right? Because we're doing this using nodes, we can always go back to the beginning, like we were talking about earlier, and just dial and tweak these things the way we'd like. So you're not stuck with the decisions that you made from the past. You can just, adjust. You can even just rescatter the skulls if you want to. You could change the skull mesh. Yeah, that's the beauty, right? It's so nice, yeah.
We can always go back and say we want to have way less skulls. And everything would then be recomputed. Or we want to have more skulls.
Or even if you want to like rotate the skull to see the other side of the mesh, we do this when scattering bricks and stuff all the time and debris. If you were building this using just images, that you'd have to create the entire other side of the geometry that you were scattering. So because we're using a mesh to start with, we can just rotate the skulls and rotate the geometry right away. It's a really nice flexible way of working.
Yeah, but I would say let's try to texture it and then finish this material. So for the soil, what do we want here? A dark brown. And then for the base, just add some color variance to it. This is going to be hard for you guys to see on the stream because it's such a dark color. But color variance basically allows you to quickly add a lot of different details to your input image based on the parameters here. How much hue variance, how much luminance variance. And how big is the scale of the variance that you set? So right here, it can do luminance variance all the way from 0 to 1. So you go from super dark to super bright. So you can adjust this by setting it to a lower value. And you can also, let's keep it at 1 so you guys can see the effect here. The grain scale controls how big the color variance is. So you can create very small grains or you can make it a bit bigger. I think for our case, the big grain scale is probably not that terrible. Let's maybe keep it like this, and then we change this to a low value again. Like this. And then we're going to set this as our background color, I guess. Or maybe we should add a bit more color actually to it. So I'll add a blend node. And as foreground, I'll set a white. Now bring in my height map, just the soil here. So this image is our base soil, and what I want to do here is turn that into a curvature map. And I'll use the convex output here as our mask. And then we'll plug that into our base color. Yeah, let's change the roughness. and maybe the IBL. I think this IBL is tinted blue, so that makes it a bit more difficult to understand the color values, but you see this one is a bit easier to understand. And then what we want to do is maybe make this a bit yellowish, just a tiny bit. And then here we set it to soft light, the blend mode. Just so we get a bit of the curvature.
So right now what we're seeing is that we're working on the background color first before we start, working on the higher layer with the skulls. So that might be why you're seeing some of those colors kind of bleeding onto the surface of the skulls at this point. That's totally fine. Right now we're just focusing on the color of the bottom layer first, using maps like the curvature map from the soil, and then we'll continue to refine and add and fill in the colors for the skulls later.
Yep. And doing this is a bit unconventional, but as you guys can see, this gives us a very interesting look on the material where it just brings out the curvature and a bit more of this, the soil look here, makes the details pop a little bit more. Let's take a look if we just do a default blend. Maybe we can make that look a bit more visually interesting. Yeah, like this, it looks pretty nice. It's a hot topic. Some people hate it if you use the curvature map for your base color. I do like it. I think sometimes it's nice. Sometimes it can easily make things look too stylized, but I feel like in this case it does work because the dry mud should be a bit brighter than the rest. So I feel like bringing in those details like this it's not a bad idea. What do you think, Jeremy?
I think it's justifiable. I think that makes a lot of sense. If you have a soil where there's grooves in the soil, oftentimes that's going to be a lot more moist. It might be a lot more shiny, right? And then the parts that pick up, poke out, are going to be a lot more dry because there's wind. So, it's a great way to make stylized things as well. But I also think it's a really nice way to physically apply roughness and apply texture too.
Yeah, and I think to explore, the color a bit better, use an HCL or HSL and then just tweak it a little bit. It's a bit easier than picking the colors to find the right hue.
You could do a color if you prefer to use a color widget where you're picking specific colors as well. I mean, to each his own. We have a node for that as well, where you can match the color that you're selecting. But a lot of times, just if you want to dial it in slightly and just change it a little bit, then using the sliders with the HCL, the HSL is also great.
And I think we should break it up a little bit, right? So I'll bring in the solve node, and maybe I'll have to switch that to grayscale to do relocate, and then I'll use this as the foreground or as the background, and then I'll use this as the mask, just so the details are not all over the material. Again, it's nice to have some places where you can see the details more, like the blurring, where we blur sometimes and sometimes we don't. So we have areas where we have high frequency noise, and like this, it just breaks it up a little bit more and makes it more interesting to look at.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's interesting because a lot of times the material workflow is to base everything on the height map, right? Base everything on the original source and then build on top of that. But you're not always locked to that kind of workflow. In this case, we're just, designing the color of this material kind of like we're painting it, kind of like we're doing it as this extra step on top of it. Yes, utilizing parts like the curvature, but also adding with some randomization. And it's a great way, another great way to approach texturing.
Yeah, and always make sure to look at different IBLs, because the color and the light response is very different depending on the IBL. Scene lighting really changes the colors, changes the feel. So always review in different IBLs. Make sure you get a feeling for how the material looks in different conditions. I feel like it's a bit oversaturated almost, but I'm not entirely sure.
One technique that we used when building materials for the library was we would base our colors on the IBL background. So if you saw what the saturation of a brick was in the actual background of the viewport and compared it to the saturation of bricks that you were making, as the material, then you have a great way to be able to judge if that's too saturated or if it's kind of in a weird place.
Right. So let's just quickly do the roughness map. What I would do here is I'll just take the height map and then I'll use a levels node to figure out how I want to transform the roughness values on the material, because right now it's a bit distracting to me that it's all the same roughness. And I think the skulls should probably be they should be I'm not sure what has a higher roughness, the material or the skull. I guess the material, and then the skull should be a bit more glossy.
They'll certainly pop out more if they're shiny, but definitely picking a separation in roughness between the two, at least a major, overall roughness. For example, the soil making this more rough will distinguish. It's like color. It's another way to distinguish the separate elements and give the eye the ability to determine, what's connected, what's different, what should we focus on.
Absolutely. So let's see then. How does this look here? Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Right now it's a bit irritating that the skulls are still in the color of the soil, right? We have to fix this next. Let me go back to an IBL here that I feel comfortable working with. I think it's this one is very neutral, or this one. It's one of those. Yeah, let's keep here. And then what we need next is a mask to color our skulls. And again, we can use the mask from the blend height. The mask output, remember, gives us just the positions where we have the skull on the material, the skulls on the material. So this is perfect for us to do a blend. We want to use it as opacity mask, and then the background is going to be the current soil, and the foreground is going to be whatever we want on the skulls, and it already looks a bit more reasonable. So let's...
That blend height node is so useful. That would have been another 3, 4, 5 steps to be able to distinguish where that mask is. So I definitely recommend creating materials and building them up in components like this and using something like that blend height node. It just does a lot of that extra work for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you could even split it out into separate graphs, and then you just bring in the skulls graph, and you bring in your soil graph, and then you do the compositing in a different graph. There's basically no performance cost to working like this, and I would recommend you guys to doing it. It makes it much easier, and then you can also reuse the skulls for a different material, or you can reuse the soil for a different material. And having that consistency in the art direction really improves the final scene that you're creating. So this might be a good base color for the skulls. Let's see. Oh, it's way too saturated. I guess more like this. And then I want to have a bit of texture on the skull, and to do that we have a really nice noise. I think it's called something like marble noise here. And then we can use the marble noise to add a bit of cracks and fractures to our skulls.
I was actually going to recommend since we have like a cracks generator, but actually the marble noise is a great choice here.
I mean, it's very much like skull or bone tissue or something like this, right?
Yeah, I actually think we even have a bone material in the library as well, and I can't recall if it uses this noise or not.
I could see it using it, to be honest. So I have my top layer here, and to create a darker color, I can just use HCl or HSL, and then maybe darken this color tone a bit, and then maybe add a bit more saturation to the cracks, and use this foreground. And then we can plug this into our blend here. I don't know, I can't see it really. We can probably increase the gamma. I can see it here. Can you see it? I don't know if you can see it in the stream.
It's slight. Yeah, I can see more of a color change than the actual kind of cracks or crevices.
Yeah, but we can level it in a bit, right? So it's more visible.
Yeah, I can see it a bit more there. Yeah, there we go. That helps.
Yeah, I think that looks cool. I like this.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We could have used Cracks Organic for this as well, but I feel like using marble noise here it's pretty sufficient, and it just gets the job done pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. You often find that even though it's called marble noise, you can just analyze the shapes itself and say, oh, that could be really useful for something else as well. So I recommend just trying and exploring.
Yeah, so I think next we should probably tie it better together, because right now the skulls are super clean, and then they're on the very dirty soil. And to do this, I think we can just add a layer of grunge, and I would use the material effect dirt for this to just quickly tie it together. So let's see. I'll switch back to link category mode, so all of my material pins are now combined, and here I'll just drag a connection and type dirt.
By the way, Manfred, I think we should probably save the material soon, just in case we want to make sure we have everything. Not that anything would ever happen. I know we have autosave as well, but it gives me that peace of mind.
I just saved. So nothing spooky. And then here, previewing this, you can see we're now previewing that node. We can increase the dirt level, have the AO impacted more. Now you can see how we get the dirt on the skulls naturally, tying it more together. But I think we should have also some grunge. So if you increase the grunge slider, it doesn't just add it into the areas where you have the AO map, it adds it globally over your material. So it's a bit easier to just have it in all the different areas. And what's nice about this node is that it actually adds it not just to the base color, you get some details on the roughness. So if I increase or decrease this, you can see the roughness map, the response in the roughness map, just adding a bit more detail to the material.
Yeah, the material workflow by adding these effects at the end are a nice way to kind of polish up and refine the material once you've kind of set it as like a base starting point. You've got all these components that are working well together, and then you can just apply some of these extra effects on top of it just to kind of add that extra 10% to the end.
Absolutely, and I mean, if you compare it, it makes such a difference, right? Here's the previous, and then here with the dirt. You can see how it nicely just pulls everything together. And what we could do for the AO, I feel like we could have more details in our AO map, right? You see that we have, of course, we have the area around the skulls and a bit of the details. And if you want to have more details, you could decrease the bias. You see it brings up way more detail of your soil.
Right, because the soil is generating, it knows where to place things based on that ambient occlusion map. So that's a very good point. Adding more details to the AO map will definitely add more details to the noise in this case.
Indeed, and now changing the AO changes of course the final AO map, but it also changes how the dirt works and where the dirt is being placed. So it just makes things look a bit better, and you get a lot of added benefits from working based on all the maps that you create in the process. So then you just, like with the noises, we can always go back and change how the soil looks, how much flex we have, how much fine-grained noise we have. All right, so the next node I typically add would be the material effect dust. Again, it's a node that ties it better together, and you often don't even have to tweak a lot. And what I like about the dust as well, it adds a bit of different use to it. You see it uses this greenish, yellowish color here, and that just adds a bit of different use to the material, making it look more interesting. We can also change the color of our dirt. Right now it's very black. We could bring in some more saturation here and make it a bit darker so it fits better with the base material. All right, and what I want to add to make it more spooky is add a bit of blood pools to it. And for this, I'll use material effect water. But we're not going to use water here. We're actually going to add some blood to it. So let's decrease the water level a bit. And as a color, we're going to use a pretty reddish color. And like this, we don't see too much of it, right? And the reason is we can fine-tune how this looks if we increase the base color darkening. So you see if I pull up the red, we will see the blood pools a bit better. Actually, I think we should change the color of the soil to make the blood pop a bit better. I would say we desaturate it so it's more like grayish soil. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that would add some contrast so that it really pulls it out. That's a nice effect, actually. I wasn't thinking that, but that's a really cool way of using the water effect node.
But you see, this looks awesome. Now we see the blood, and the desaturated soil actually looks really cool. It works really well together. So let's see what else we can do here. I feel like I don't want to have too many of these ripples. Let's use less ripples. And then the density allows you to control how clean the water is. So right now the water is very clean, and you can see the the surface below it very, very easily. And if you increase the density, it becomes more muddy, thicker water. And I feel like for blood, the density should be very high. But we can increase the softness a little bit so it blends smoother from the shallow areas to the deep areas of the pool.
I was going to say another way to make it seem thicker is to adjust the transition between the shore of the water and where the water is, because if it's thicker water, it's not going to bleed onto the surface as much. It's going to be a lot more like a syrup or a sap, whereas if it's much more thin, it's going to seep into the soil a lot more.
Looks pretty cool. And with the shore wetness, you can control how the roughness drops close to the pool. So if I increase it, you can see that more soil looks wet. But if I decrease it, you have a sharper transition from the water roughness onto the shores. I like it. Looks spooky.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Very nice. Yeah, so, and then, as I mentioned earlier, the final note should be, of course, material finalized. It just adds that extra polish to your material. Like this. And here we can tune the settings like height blur. So if I crank that up, you see now we have a very strong blur on our height map. And it doesn't look so nice, but when you create a game, you have to be mindful, or it depends where you use the material, but if you would use it for a game, you have to be mindful about the amount of tessellation that you can realistically do in your game. So you see with a strong blur, you still get the effect across. It still looks pretty good. Of course, if you don't do it at all, it looks way more realistic. You have the skulls popping out perfectly. But if I would decrease the tessellation level here in our renderer, let's say we go to something like 5, you'll get more artifacting. Actually, it's not even so bad. Maybe in this area where you have this weird fall off. And then the height blur helps a lot to make sure that it looks better even with a very, very low tessellation level. But in this case, I'll just keep it. I'll crank it up.
One of the things I like about Finalize as well is it sharpens. That's a tiny bit of sharpening to the, I believe it's to the base color, right? And that just makes it pop a little more. You can see it from a distance better. It brings out
absolutely
all those details a little bit. It's a nice effect.
I actually think we can afford quite a bit of sharpening for this material. Like this. And then I'll expose our outputs. I kept previewing the individual material nodes and then, go to the next node, preview. Of course, that's a way to work. That's how I work. But you could also just expose your outputs directly. So when you hit M, you always go back to seeing your material output. So let's expose those guys here. So we have our material assembled more or less. Like this. Are there any questions from chat, by the way? Are you guys observing the chat?
Everyone's just, they're just... captured by the material for sure. We got some comments. It's really spooky. But overall, I think people are really
captured by the material. That's great. Yeah, I think it looks great. Even if you set displacement, let's disable displacement actually. Check this out, guys. This looks great. This could be a material in Doom, to be honest. This looks great even without any displacement.
Yeah, I agree. And the fact that we got a lot of things, that came with using a mesh, right? We have the normal information that we got from using the skull, and then we could supply and fill out the material more by using kind of more traditional, is it traditional now, PBR texturing methods? Using image-based compositing and manipulation. It's a pretty cool workflow to show off. I'm glad I got to do this today.
Yeah, it looks really cool. I really love this. Looks great. Yeah, Diablo, Doom. It's a really spooky, great material. Pretty awesome.
Some skull emojis in the chat as well. It's pretty great.
So, what else can we do here? Maybe, we have more meshes. Let's try to add some body parts to our material and make it more interesting. And keep in mind, what's beautiful about this material is you could actually take the skull FBX, and right now it's a local variable, but this could be an input parameter, right? So then when you use the material in your renderer or you need a material in Maya for your scene, you could just plug in a different mesh and you would get the same kind of material with a completely different scatter. I'll save my package and I'll bring in, what do we bring in? A foot. I think a foot sounds interesting. And then we will bring the foot in here. We spawn it as a mesh in our scene. And then I probably have to transform this, right? It's probably facing upright or something. No, it's not so bad.
Someone also has a vote in for adding some creepy hands in there as well.
This actually looks reasonable when we want to scatter it. Remember, we scattered in the initial state, and right now it's like it's sitting flat on the plane. And this is exactly how I would want to scatter this foot piece here. So let's just plug it into one of those set vertex color nodes, and you can see that we have some feet on our scatter. That's hilarious. But now we removed one skull, right? To keep the same skull, let's just keep it as it was before. And all we have to do to add another mesh to scatter, we can just set the input to 4. Then we can bring back the foot and plug it in. And then we have some feet bones here. That's cool.
Got a question in the chat saying, could we try using histogram scans to get some random cracks on the skulls? That's a great way to be able to isolate different parts on the noises and the grunges that we're using. Utilizing those histogram, what do you call them? Filtering kind of methods.
Absolutely. I mean, I used the levels, right? That's similar. I selected a part of the histogram to pronounce the cracks. Pelvis. Ribs. Let's take this gap. So I increase the scatter mesh count because we want to scatter an additional mesh, and I'll just plug that guy into 5. I don't know where it is, but it's good to have a few more bone parts here on our material, right? And that's the cool thing. It's so easy to do this. We could even increase the size of our skulls if you want to have them bigger. Maybe set it to 12. But I think the distribution is actually pretty good, right? It's not too much, it's not too little. I'm sure if we increase the tile count, it'll look fine. Actually, we have 3 skulls in a row here. That's not so great. But that's just the nature of like randomization, right? Some seed is going to look perfect, another one is going to look a bit funny. But if you don't want to have the repetition, one way to solve this is to just scatter less items and have it a bit more sparse. You decrease the probability of having 2 things right next to each other. But I really like the distribution of the material. If you look at this at tile level 2, I feel like you almost don't see a repetition, right? Even though it's tiling like 4 times the same image at this point, but it looks pretty good.
We also have a question, can the bone sizes be randomized?
The bone sizes?
Yes, the different tiling. Yeah, we can absolutely add variance to the scattered
I mean,
meshes,
that's what we do. We have the minimum and a maximum scale. So the minimum scale is basically 8 units and the maximum is 12. And then each scatter of the mesh will select a value between 8 and 12. So that's how we would do it. It's similar to the rotation here, where you have the minimum rotation set to 0. And you could set this to minus 360 and minus 86 here, so you actually fall over in both directions and you're not just always falling to the right. So now it falls to the left or it falls to the right.
Yeah, no, that was a great question. Thanks for asking. Anybody who's joining in here, kind of in the middle or while we're in the stream, first of all, welcome. And we're creating some pretty cool stuff, kind of Halloween creepy theme today. We're building a material in the element graph in Instamat, and it allows you to combine different mediums like meshes, point clouds, images together. And so in this case, we actually just took some random skeleton pieces, added them to the graph, and then we're just scattering them, just like you would scatter something, image-based, and using that to build a material.
Absolutely, and it's so dynamic. So let's just wrap up this material. What we should do is probably expose some parameters. So I'll rename those local variables. I drag those meshes into the graph so they're local. You cannot edit them when you use the graph. To make them editable, what you have to do is you can just right-click on one of those local variables and then just click Promote to Input Parameter. So I'll repeat that process a few times. We have exposed all of our meshes. I think it would also be nice to expose the scatter count. Expose that as input parameter. And I think it makes sense to expose the water level. And maybe even the water color could be a nice parameter. What else?
Maybe the influence of the dirt, how much dirt we add on to the using the AO.
Sure. So right click and then I'll choose expose as input parameter. And I'll also do the same for the grunge. Okay, and now if you look at our parameters we have, it's pretty messy. So I think what would make sense is rename count by double clicking to bone count and then move that to the top. And we should probably be honest about this, right? This is not scattering 100 meshes per se. It's the maximum possible if nothing is intersecting because of our cancellation. So let's call that maximum bone count. And then we could probably group things together. If you look at some of our materials and notes, I don't know where we have it. Here we actually have it in the material make. You see we have a lot of parameters grouped on a material. And doing this is actually very easy. You can just select all of the things you want to group. You go to the variable editor in the top right, and then on the category you can write something like bone meshes. And then if you go back, you'll see your input parameters are now nicely grouped. And then here we can group those as grunge and water. Like this. So now we have nice groups for our material. Save it like this. And it looks pretty cool. And keep in mind, with that basis, we can do quite a lot. So maybe we'll wrap up with this. I can create a material layering project. And in my material layering project, I can now bring in the material that I just created in the node-based workflow, the skull and bones. And then here, you guys can see it works exactly as it should. And I can now compose this with different materials. For instance, I don't want to have the water here when I compose it, so I'll just set that to 0. And I might want to have a different soil material like the roots. We have the roots covered dead soil. I think that could be interesting to add it in. So I'll just drag it onto the stack. And you can see that this is now blending both together quite nicely. Yeah.
Yeah, you read my mind. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, I was thinking. I actually had it in my mind only because you mentioned it in the last stream, to be honest.
Okay. It's great to be able to show this off because, yeah, so for those of you who are new to Instamat, you can combine multiple project types together into one package. And so what Manfred just did was he created a new type of project type in Instamat. Well, not a new project type, but a different one from the node-based graph. And this is a layer-based project type that allows you to combine materials together very easily just by dragging and dropping them in a layer stack, just like you're doing some kind of painting workflow. And so what we're doing is being able to create more complex materials by building on top of each other just like that. It's a really cool workflow in Instamat.
Absolutely. And to get the color palettes to be closer together, right? Because we have the blackish dark soil and now we have that bright brown soil here on the material. I do think it looks cool. I like it because it breaks up the material really nicely and you still have the roots growing over the soil, and even some of the stones and rocks are now properly integrated into the base that I created earlier. But if I want to bring it close together in terms of color palettes, I can use the color match, and then I'll choose the match as a target mode, the previous layer base color. So by default it's on color and it just matches a static color, which is also very handy. But you can automatically match the previous layer like this, and then you can see without the color filter enabled, the color matching filter, and with it enabled, it just brings it super close together. It looks great, and it looks like the roots are growing through the skulls. I think this looks perfect. This is a very nice material already, and that's what you can do with Instamat, right? You can make that, you can create materials like this within just a few seconds. And if you want to have some sand, you can find some really nice looking beach sand, bring it in here, disable the roots, and then here we can adjust the height. Let's move that down a little bit. Actually, no, we should move the skulls up a little bit instead. We want to have them poke out. And maybe here the color matching is too strong, so we lower the opacity.
got a question about the skulls for a second here, and thanks for the questions, guys. Feel free to keep adding them in. I'll try to get them in to the stream as quickly as I can. So, can we do a function where there's 2 feet for every skull scattered? Can we get more specific with how we're scattering those skulls?
2 feet for every skull. I don't think that's possible yet, but what you could do is do 2 different scatters and then just use mesh append and combine them, or use the one where you scattered the skulls as the input for scattering the feet. And this way you would actually be able to scatter a feet mesh on a skull mesh. I think that's nobody ever said this.
It's actually something I didn't realize was, is it 2 metric system feet or imperial? I can't remember. Is it 2? Are we going by distance, or are we saying that there's 2 feet meshes every skull mesh? I'm not entirely sure. Both of which are definitely something you could probably do with some masking. And we have another kind of question, kind of a little unrelated to this, but can Instamat be used to create brush height maps to be used in terrains in either a game engine like Unity or Unreal Engine?
Brush height maps? In what sense?
If it's something like an Unreal Engine type brush, maybe it's kind of like scattering or creating, meshes from height maps, and that's absolutely possible. We can create meshes from height data. In fact, that's we've kind of done the opposite. We went from
meshing. So you want to mesh a height map?
I think so. Creating brush height maps. Maybe you could, while we're talking about it, you could clarify that there.
Yeah.
But it says to be used in terrain. So, for example, he's saying adding a mountain as a brush. So maybe so there's a few things I can think about here. One thing is you can turn a mesh into a height map and then use that as like a painting implement where you're painting height data. That's definitely possible. Or if you're trying to do the opposite, that's also possible. If you have the height information for a mountain, you can turn that mountain into a mesh that you can scatter in engines as well. So either one's possible.
Yeah, I mean, maybe clarify the question.
Absolutely.
Actually, it also looks pretty cool if we blend the roots into the skull material, right? That also has something going on for it.
So he says painting with height data was the point. So yeah, if you want to create your own brushes that you can then build on a height map for in Instamat, absolutely you can use the element graph to create something like that. In fact, a lot of our decals and our patterns and things like that are procedurally created using the element graph. So you could take a look at some of those in the library and see how those are built, and then you can absolutely build those and integrate them into your game engine.
Absolutely. You can use any node that you want as a brush mask. For instance, one feature that I really love about Instamat is that I can, for instance, go to the grunge category and then choose a very interesting grunge, like which one do we want here? Maybe one of those bots noises. And then if I would add that, if I would paint like this, it looks very weird, right? Because we just stamp on that square. But what's really nice about Instamat is you have those 3 parameters here at the top where you can apply a vignette automatically to your brush. So any input would just work, as you guys can see here. You can even control directly the contrast for your brush, and you can also increase the brightness. So there's a lot of control in addition to being able to use any node as input for a brush.
And you can absolutely create your own brushes, in this case, using the element graph as well. So I really think that Instamat has one of the most, complex and full-featured, brush creation engines, because you can build these brushes using the element graph and make them fully procedural by exposing their parameters. It's a really cool use case for Instamat.
Yeah, I think that looks great. All right, guys, I think we're done with this material for today. We have to wrap this up. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, guys. This is really important to us. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, we have some surprises for you guys. We have a surprise announcement for you. If you go to our official website at instamaterial.com or instalot.com, there's a Halloween sale where you can get 30% off on any pro license that you guys want to buy right now. So I recommend you guys to do this. It's great value, and it's only going to be up for a few days as far as I know. What does it say? Let me see, until 3rd November. So it's a few days for you guys to get the pro license with 30% off discount. It's a great price, and you guys can support us as well. So let's see if we have some other things to say on the agenda here. What does it say? All right, there's another important thing, guys. November is coming around. We didn't do a formal announcement just yet, but November is basically the month to create a node-based material. And we're going to have a competition to select the best material that you guys create with and for Instamat. And you'll be able to win a pro license and some official abstract swags like our hoodies or T-shirts, some brochures. I don't know what the guys are going to bundle up for you, but it's going to be worth doing. To participate this time, we're going to not just have you guys post screenshots, but you'll have to post the actual material on Polyverse. Make sure to check out our socials and our website. We're going to be posting more information about November at Abstract. All right, guys, I hope you had a good time with us today. This is it for our spooky Halloween stream. I hope you had a good time. See you guys soon. Take care.